Picture this. A Tuesday morning in September. A dry Texas sky, bone white and merciless. 63 people standing in a field of cracked caliche dirt, their hats pulled low against a sun that had no interest in mercy. A farmhouse behind them, modest, gray-boarded, its screen door hanging on one hinge. A woman standing on the porch steps in a blue cotton dress. Her hands folded, her face still. In front of her, a bank representative in a cream-colored suit, a government-stamped document in his left hand and a pocket watch in his right. To his left, an auctioneer at a portable podium whose voice could carry 300 yards when the wind was down. Around him, 6 or 7 men in newer boots than the rest. Buyers from Amarillo, buyers from Lubbock, men who knew what dryland wheat farms went for when a widow couldn't make the payments. And then, at the back of the crowd, standing in work pants and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, holding a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, a man nobody recognized at first. 6 feet 4 inches tall, 220 pounds. He hadn't spoken yet. The auctioneer cleared his throat, lifted his gavel, and called the opening bid. What happened next, nobody in that field expected. This is that story. The town of Gruver sits in Hansford County, Texas, 1,700 people, a grain elevator, a hardware store, and a Baptist church that rang its bell every Sunday morning whether the congregation came or not. By September of 1958, the Texas Panhandle had been through 3 years of drought so persistent that the soil itself seemed to have given up the ambition of being farmland. The buffalo grass was gone. The wheat stubble that remained was the color of old rope. Elma Doris Hartley, widowed 11 months earlier when her husband, Vernon, died of a heart attack in the cab of his John Deere 730 at the age of 51, had managed to hold on longer than anyone expected. She had 840 acres, a modest frame house, 2 grain bins rated for 20,000 bushels each, and a debt of $24,300 to the First National Bank of Spearman, the county seat 22 miles south. She had made every payment for the first 7 months. Then the summer of 1958 hit. The winter wheat failed to germinate. The soil temperature stayed too low through early spring and then vaulted too high by late April. By July, Elma Hartley had no crop, no income, and a payment due on the 14th of August that she could not make. When she called the bank, the loan officer, a man named Harlan Doss, 38 years old, 8 years with the institution, known in the county as a man who followed the terms of a contract the way a compass needle follows north, informed her that the bank had no mechanism for deferral on a farm note of this size. He was not cruel about it. He was not warm about it either. The auction was set for September 9th, a Tuesday, at 9 a.m. Word spread the way word spreads in small Texas towns, through feed stores and beauty parlors and post office lines. And the feeling in Gruver in the days leading up to the 9th was one of quiet, helpless anger. Not directed at any specific person. Directed at the mechanism of the thing. The impersonal hydraulics of debt. Harlan Doss arrived at 8:40 that morning in a white 1957 Ford Fairlane with the bank's logo on the door. He was accompanied by 2 men from the Spearman office and a licensed auctioneer named Roy Pickett, who had conducted over 200 agricultural auctions in the Texas Panhandle and who carried himself with the practiced neutrality of a man who had made his peace with difficult mornings. Pickett set up his podium at the edge of the dirt lot in front of the barn. He arranged his papers. He tested his voice against the open air. The crowd gathered slowly. Neighbors who had known Vernon Hartley for 20 years. Men who had borrowed his equipment during tight harvests. Women who had brought Elma casseroles and pound cakes in the months after the funeral. They stood together in a loose half-circle, and they were quiet in the way that people are quiet when they already know the ending and have come only because showing up is the last thing they can do. The buyers from out of county arrived in pairs. One drove a late-model Chevrolet pickup with dealer plates from Lubbock, a land broker who had attended 7 similar auctions that calendar year alone and who moved through the crowd with the comfortable confidence of a man who had never lost a bid he wanted to win. His name was Clifford Reese. He was 44 years old. He stood 5 feet 11, weighed 195 pounds, wore ostrich skin boots that cost more than Elma Hartley's monthly note, and carried a bank draft in his interior jacket pocket for $31,000. He had already spoken with Harlan Doss about the property. He had already made arrangements with a second buyer to split the acreage. He had, in all the ways that matter before a gavel falls, already won. Reese surveyed the crowd with the mild interest of a man attending a process he controls. He did not notice the man at the back. Nobody did at first. The man in the flannel shirt had arrived at 8:55 in a rented Ford pickup, parking it on the far edge of the gravel road without blocking the neighbors' vehicles. He had walked to the edge of the gathering and stopped there. He held a paper coffee cup from a diner in Groover, the kind that comes with a cardboard sleeve when the coffee is fresh, but his sleeve had long since been peeled off in the heat. He hadn't thrown it away. He was holding it the way a man holds something when his hands need a job that isn't ringing each other. He was watching Elma Hartley on her porch. Not watching Reese. Not watching Doss. Not watching the auctioneer arrange his papers. Watching her. His hands were extraordinary. The left one cradling that cold coffee cup had fingers thick as hickory dowels, the knuckles large and flat, the palm wide enough to palm a man's skull. His shoulders sat level and still. Not the aggressive stillness of a man preparing for a fight, but the operational stillness of a man who has already made his decision and is simply waiting for the moment to execute it. He didn't wear a hat. His hair was brown, going gray at the temples in 1958, and the morning sun hit the side of his face in a way that made him look, from certain angles, like a formation of land rather than a human being. Something old and patient, and completely indifferent to the discomfort of waiting. A woman standing near him, a neighbor named Loretta Cranston, who would recount this morning at length to her daughter and granddaughter in years to come, noticed his boots first. Not ostrich. Not dressed. They were working boots, dark brown leather, worn at the toe-in. The way that boots get worn when a man actually uses them. She glanced up at his face. She looked back at the auction podium. She looked at him again. She did not say anything. But something behind her eyes changed. A small, involuntary shift of recognition. The expression a person makes when a familiar face appears in a context so unexpected that confirmation takes several seconds. The auctioneer tapped his podium twice and called the crowd to order. But here's where it changes. Roy Pickett was professional, efficient, and morally neutral, which is exactly what an auctioneer is paid to be. He read the legal description of the property. He cited the outstanding note amount. He described the land in the plain language of county records. 840 acres, Hansford County, Section 14, Township 5 North, Range 20 East. 2 grain bins, 1 equipment barn, 1 residential structure. Elma Hartley stood on the porch with her hands folded and her face still, and she did not look at Pickett when he read the description of the house she had lived in for 23 years. Clifford Reese was the first bidder. He raised 2 fingers without lifting his elbow from his side. The practiced, minimal gesture of a man who bids at auction the way a poker player bets. Revealing nothing, conserving energy, communicating only what he must. His opening bid was $22,000. A second buyer, the man from Amarillo, came in at $22,500. Reese moved to $23,000. The Amarillo man dropped out. Harlan Doss, standing to the left of the podium in his cream suit with the bank document folded in his jacket pocket, checked his pocket watch. 9:07 a.m. The note total was $24,300. Once the bidding cleared that number, the bank was made whole, and whatever remained above it would go to Elma Hartley. The problem was that on 840 acres of drought-beaten panhandle dryland at September 1958 prices, the land wasn't worth dramatically more than the debt. Reese knew it. Doss knew it. The Amarillo man had known it before he walked away. Reese came in at $24,500. The crowd was quiet. A neighbor in the back, a farmer named Gus Maring who had known Vernon Hartley since they were both young men, said later that the silence in those few seconds had a texture to it, like the air before a West Texas electrical storm, charged and unmoving and pressing against the skin. Pickett called for further bids. That was the moment Clifford Reese turned and looked at the crowd. Not to acknowledge competition, but because a man who is certain he has already won will sometimes look around for the pleasure of confirmation. His eyes moved across the assembled neighbors, the grieving widow, the handful of buyers who'd already stepped back. His eyes landed on the man in the flannel shirt at the back of the crowd. Reese's expression was the expression of a man encountering an obstacle he has already calculated to be too small to matter. His chin came up a quarter inch. His mouth thinned slightly. He said nothing out loud, but the body language was unmistakable to everyone standing close enough to see it. It said, "You don't belong here." John Wayne looked at Clifford Reese for 3 seconds. He didn't move his shoulders. He didn't set down his coffee cup. He didn't change his expression. Then he looked back at Elma Hartley on the porch. And he raised his hand. A man standing near the podium, a local banker named Walt Greer, who had no role in the proceedings but had come out of his own sense of dread at the morning's conclusion, described it afterward as the moment the auction stopped being an auction and became something else. He said he didn't have a word for what it became. He said he was still looking for the right word when his granddaughter asked him about it 40 years later. Wayne's bid, $30,000. $30,000. In 1958 currency. For a drought-struck Panhandle wheat farm with a $24,300 note and a widow on the porch. Pickett hesitated for one full second before repeating the number. The crowd did not murmur. The crowd went completely silent. Reese turned around fully now. His posture changed. The easy horizontal confidence compressed slightly, recalibrated. He looked at the man in the flannel shirt with a different expression than before. Not calculation, not dismissal. Something with more edges to it. His broker's instinct told him to go to $30,500. But his instinct was at war with something else now. Something it didn't have a name for. Harlan Doss, standing with his document and his pocket watch, had gone very still. In the first second after Wayne's bid was announced, Pickett recovered his professional composure and turned to Reese, the last active bidder. With the practiced neutrality of a man who has watched more than 200 auctions and understands that what happens next is between the bidders, not the auctioneer. In the second, Reese made the calculation. He was a land broker. He operated on margins. The $31,000 draft in his pocket was his ceiling. The number his partners had authorized before the split arrangement made financial sense. At $30,000 flat, Wayne had already placed the bid within $1,000 of Reese's hard stop. If Reese bid $30,500, Wayne could counter. If Wayne countered to $31,000, Reese was at his limit. If Wayne went past that number, Reese was done. More importantly, Reese had no idea who this man was or how deep his pockets ran. That uncertainty, that one unquantifiable variable, was the thing that rewrote the morning. Reese had built his professional life on information. On knowing the seller's desperation, the bank's timeline, the competing buyer's ceiling. He had walked into this auction knowing every number except one. And that number was now standing at the back of a crowd in worn leather boots holding a cold paper coffee cup, and it was looking at him with the patient, unhurried attention of a man who has all the time in the world. In the third second, something happened on Reese's face. Not defeat. Not anger. Not humiliation. Something more private and more permanent than any of those. The specific expression of a man who suddenly understands that the rules he has been playing by for 20 years do not apply this morning. He did not raise his hand. Pickett waited. 5 full seconds. The legal duration of his pause stretched out over the field like the shadow of a thunderhead. $30,000, Pickett said, his voice carrying across the caliche. Going once. Nobody moved. Going twice. The screen door on the farmhouse hinged open slightly in a breath of wind. Elma Hartley's hands, still folded in front of her, tightened for a moment, then released. Sold. The word landed in the field like a stone dropped in still water. The silence held for 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3, and then it broke from multiple directions simultaneously. Neighbors exhaled. Walt Greer, the local banker who had no role in the proceedings, put one hand flat against the fence post beside him as if he needed it for balance. Gus Mehring removed his hat and held it against his chest. Loretta Cranston, standing next to the man in the flannel shirt, looked up at him. His expression had not changed. He was still watching Elma Hartley on the porch. He had set down the cold coffee cup at some point during the bidding, placed it carefully on the top rail of the wooden fence beside him, not dropped, not thrown, but set, with the same quiet deliberateness with which he had placed his bid. He moved through the crowd now. Not quickly. Not the theatrical movement of a man who wants to be seen making an entrance. He moved the way a very large man moves when he has spent 40 years learning to navigate rooms without displacing the furniture of other people's comfort, with a kind of spatial consideration that most men his size never develop. He walked to the porch steps. Elma Hartley was 52 years old, 5 feet 3 inches tall, and she had not wept once in the 11 months since her husband died. Not at the funeral. Not during the long winter of paperwork and bank calls. Not on the morning the auction notice arrived. She had folded everything that needed folding and placed it in the part of herself that farm women from the Texas Panhandle learned to maintain. A room inside the house of the self that locks from the inside and only unlocks on your own terms. She looked up at the man on her porch steps. He extended his right hand. She looked at it for a moment, the size of it, the worn knuckles, the quietness of the gesture. She shook it. "Ma'am," he said. That was all. Harlan Doss approached with the paperwork. He was carrying himself differently than he had 20 minutes ago. Not chastened, exactly, because Doss was a man who followed the terms of contracts and had nothing to apologize for in that regard. But something had adjusted in him. The pocket watch had gone back into his pocket. The document was folded in both hands instead of one. $30,000 cleared the debt. The remaining $5,700, after the bank's satisfied note, would go to Elma Hartley. Wayne signed the paperwork at a small folding table Pickett had set up beside the podium. He signed the way he did everything that morning, without ceremony, without visible satisfaction, as a man completing a transaction that he had decided to complete. His signature was large and unhurried. Clifford Reese stood 40 feet away, watching. His $31,000 bank draft was still in his interior jacket pocket. He had not opened it. That's not the behavior of a man who lost a bidding war. That's the behavior of a man who understood, in the space of 3 seconds at a Texas Panhandle farm auction, that he had been shown something about himself that no contract could quantify and no bank draft could address. He watched John Wayne sign the papers. He watched Elma Hartley stand straighter on her porch than she had stood all morning. He watched a woman who had folded everything away in the private locked room of herself allow her hands, just for a moment, to open. Then Clifford Reese walked back to his late-model Chevrolet with the dealer plates, started the engine, and drove south on the county road toward Spearman. The 43-year auction record of Roy Pickett, 212 agricultural sales in the Texas Panhandle, did not contain another morning like this one. He would spend the rest of his life telling people that. They met once more that day, Clifford Reese and the man who had outbid him. It was 3 hours later, at the Groover Diner on Main Street, a place called Mabel's with a counter and 6 booths and a pie case that rotated 3 varieties depending on the day of the week. Tuesday was chess pie, pecan pie, and a coconut cream that the regulars considered a minor miracle of the Panhandle. Reese had not driven back to Lubbock. He had driven south to Spearman, sat in his truck for 45 minutes outside the First National Bank thinking about what had happened, and then driven back north to Groover because some part of him understood, with the clarity that only profound surprises produce, that there was something unfinished in the morning. He walked into Mabel's at 12:20 p.m. The man in the flannel shirt was sitting at the far end of the counter, eating eggs and reading a newspaper, with a fresh cup of coffee that was actually hot this time. He had changed nothing about himself, not his clothes, not his posture, not the quality of his attention to the world around him. Reese sat down 2 stools away. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Reese said, "I'd like to understand what that was." The man in the flannel shirt folded his newspaper. He looked at Reese for a moment, not measuring him, not weighing him, simply seeing him with the full attention that very few people in the world are ever given by another human being. "That woman," Wayne said, "put 23 years into that land. Her husband's buried on the back section, up near the fence line. She told me that this morning when I arrived." Reese was quiet. "The price of the thing," Wayne said, "and the value of the thing, those aren't always the same number." He picked up his coffee cup. "You were buying a price. I was buying a value." Reese sat with that for a long time. Long enough that Mabel herself came by to refill both cups without being asked, which was the diner's silent language for take your time. "How did you know?" Reese said finally. "How did you know what it was worth?" Wayne looked at him. "Same way you knew what it cost," he said. "I did my math." He paused. "Mine just had a different column." This is the line that Loretta Cranston's daughter would write down 40 years later, after her mother told the story for the last time at the age of 81. She wrote it on the inside cover of a notebook she kept in her kitchen, the way people write down things they want to remember when memory starts to become unreliable. He did his math. "Mine just had a different column." Reese put out his hand. Wayne shook it, that same quiet, unhurried handshake he had extended to Elma Hartley on the porch steps 3 hours earlier. "I'll be honest with you," Reese said. "I've done this for 20 years. I've bought 41 properties. I've never once thought about the fence line." "No," Wayne said, and his voice was not unkind. It was the voice of a man reporting a weather condition, accurate, dispassionate, without judgment. "I know. Reese left a $20 bill on the counter for both their meals. Wayne let him. Years later, 12 years to be specific, in the summer of 1970, Clifford Reese attended an auction in Hockley County, Texas. He had continued his brokerage work through the 1960s, had grown the business, had bought and sold more than 80 additional properties. He was by any reasonable professional measure a successful man. But something had changed in the column he ran his numbers in. In 1970, he stood in a field in Hockley County while a bank conducted a distress sale on 320 acres belonging to a family named Pruitt, father and two adult sons who had gone under on the same combination of drought and debt that had taken Vernon Hartley's farm 12 years before. Reese had done his analysis. The land was worth more than the note. The math was clear. He bid $18,500, $600 over the bank's claim. The Pruitt sons looked at each other across the field. They kept the land. Reese drove home to Lubbock, and that evening he sat in his kitchen and told his wife about September 9th, 1958, and the man in the flannel shirt, and the thing about the different column. It was the first time he had told the story in full to anyone. His wife, a practical woman named Helen who kept the books for his brokerage and had never once heard her husband speak about a real estate transaction in philosophical terms, put her pen down and listened. When he finished, she said, "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Reese said, "I didn't understand it yet." Helen Reese began keeping a record of every property sale where her husband made what she called a Hartley bid, the bid that was above the math but inside the meaning. By the time Clifford Reese retired in 1981, there were 11 such notations in her ledger. 11 families, 11 fence lines, 11 moments where a land broker from Lubbock ran a number through a column he had learned from a man he met once, on a Tuesday morning in September, in a field of caliche dirt under a bone-white Texas sky. Elma Hartley lived on her farm for 14 more years after the auction. She died in 1972 at the age of 66, in the house she had shared with Vernon, in the bed they had shared for 30 years, with the view of the equipment barn through the east window and the fence line, where Vernon was buried, up near the back section, visible in the middle distance on a clear morning. The farm was sold after her death, to a neighboring rancher who knew the family. It sold for $41,000. The buyer did not haggle. Now return to that field. Return to the September morning. The bone-white sky. The 63 people in the caliche dirt. A woman on porch steps with her hands folded. A man in worn leather boots holding a cold cup of coffee, watching her with the full, patient attention of someone who has already done his math. He raised his hand. He didn't explain it. He didn't grandstand or announce himself or turn the morning into a performance. He just raised his hand. Because that was the necessary thing. Because the price of a thing and the value of a thing are not always the same number. And a man who can tell the difference between those two columns lives differently than a man who cannot. Because John Wayne understood in 1958 and in every year before and after that there is a kind of strength that does not announce itself, that moves quietly through a crowd to a porch step and extends a hand and says only ma'am and means, by that single word, everything that a courthouse full of paperwork cannot say. He knew the fence line mattered. He showed up on a Tuesday. He raised his hand. 63 witnesses. One bid. One lesson that a land broker from Lubbock spent the rest of his life running through a different column. But there is one chapter of this morning that has never been fully told. The conversation that happened in private between John Wayne and Elma Hartley before the auction began. What she said to him. What he asked her. And the reason he came to Groover that Tuesday in the first place. Not as a celebrity, not as a wealthy man looking for land, but as a man who had received a letter 6 weeks earlier that changed the geometry of the morning entirely. That story, the letter, the reason, the conversation at the kitchen table before the crowd assembled in the field, that's a story for another time.